So today I'm going to be talking about how you can utilize all of the new features that come with the new version of my auto landscape shader, with the main focus of this video being on the new elevation blend that I just added to it. So the very first thing you're going to want to do if you want to enable the global elevation blend across your landscape is scroll down in your material. You'll see there's this whole new section. It's called elevation layer. It's right here, number 5. All these settings have to do with the actual material itself. And if you scroll down a little bit, you have 06 elevation blend. That's anything to do with the actual blend of how it gets integrated into the mountains and blends with all the materials around it. If I want to enable it, all I do, there's this little swatch here, enable global elevation blend. Just check that. So if you've just updated your material to the new version, or you just enabled the elevation layer, what you're going to want to do first after enabling it is go into your landscape tab right here, and then go into your paint section. And if you scroll down, you have all of your paint layer infos for every single material. And only do this if it doesn't already exist. Grab this elevation layer and add, like to create a layer info for it, and you can save it with the other layers. You can just find the folder where they are right here, add a new one, elevation layer, make it weighted, and you're good. So this basically enables the shader to recognize that this is an active layer that you can paint on, and just gives information between the landscape and the actual shader. By default, most of the settings should be set up so that they just kind of work. But depending on, the height of your landscape, where it is in the world, all these different factors, you might have to tweak some of the settings. Let's just start with the actual layer. So the material itself, super basic right now. It's just like a white texture. It doesn't have snow or anything on it. So I've included a snow texture. You could just check it, and it should be in materials. Here, I'm just going to scroll this over here. See materials, and then there's snow. So you can just drag those textures in. It comes with all the usual bells and whistles, like displacement. You can change your channel for your channel masks, and you can control your height, your normal intensity, roughness intensity, your layer UV distance multiplier. So at a distance, how big are your UVs going to be compared to up close? So they're going to be like 0.025, so they're going to be really small. So, it tiles less and looks bigger in the distance. So you don't get all those little repetitive little bits in your texture. Oh, I also included this roughness glitter. So like on snow, you're going to want a little bit of sparkles. So I just included an option for that. Use elevation layer, distance fade. Yeah, it has the distance fade. You can just enable it or turn it off here if you're trying to optimize your shader instruction count. And yeah, if you want to enable the glitter on the roughness, you can check it here. It's just a noise texture that's extremely white with little black specks in it. It just gets multiplied over top of your actual roughness channel. Yeah, you can change the UVs for that. You can make it more intense or less intense. And yeah, world space, you can use those too if you want. So here, I'm just going to go about and set this all up really quick so that all of the material works the way that I want it to. So I'm just going to enable my channel mask. It's right here. It's just channel mask T-Snow 01A, RHAO, roughness, height, AO. So roughness in red, height in green, AO in blue. I'm just going to check these just to make sure. My height intensity, I want it to be a 1. And my snow normal is right here. Normal intensity 1. And I actually lowered the roughness intensity because I don't want it to be too crazy. Like snow, it just depends on how icy you want your snow to look. UV distance multiplier, I think 0.25 is pretty good. That's what I use for all of my other materials. And my tiling amount, 1024, should be pretty good. And glitter intensity, let's take a look at this. So you can see the glitter right here. So if I go to my buffer visualization right here, lit buffer visualization roughness, so I can see all these like black dots getting multiplied over top of my roughness texture. I'm just gonna set like 4, 3. You can see how it's altering the roughness depending. So this is without, like, it's still on, but you can't see it because I've made the intensity 0. If I turn it to 1, you get all those black dots. So let's go back so we can actually see what's going on. Glitter intensity is 4. See, that's a bit too intense. That's more like ice. So I thought like 1.5 was actually like an okay value. Just depends on how readable you want it to be. For this, I don't need world space, so I'm just gonna leave that unchecked. So this is it with all of the default settings for your blend. You know, you're gonna start up quite high. You could make it lower if you want. If you want to fiddle with the blend settings, they're all down here, elevation blend, and they use a height lerp to set it up. So what that means is it basically uses a mask texture to control how it blends. So actually it's using a combo of the mask texture, which in this case right now is just a noise. And in the shader, I've actually like duplicated the noise. So it gets overlaid over top of itself twice in the material and just creates like a more kind of random blend that happens instead of just a tiling noise texture. If you want to change the way that your mask tiles, I've included these settings at the bottom, like height lerp mask UV tiling. So like I usually like to have like a big one and like a smaller one just to add randomness to it. So if I change this to like say 5, the smaller the number, the less it's going to tile. So this is like let's say our big forms. So say like 10, 20, 30, and it kind of randomizes because both of the mask is getting multiplied over top of itself at different UV sizes. So 30, let's say I go to 100, then it starts getting more micro. I figured like for this particular mask texture, like 20 is good for the large forms, and then 50, say like 100, you can get kind of as micro as you want with it. But for me, I found 50 was pretty good. It just creates like kind of random splotchiness over top. And like because of the height lerp where it's blending between the snow and everything else, if you didn't have this, it would basically just be a line where it goes from snow to wherever else, and you'd see this big line across the world. But it uses this mask to control how it blends between the two materials. It also combines that mask with your blend bias. So your blend bias is the angles that the snow will spawn on. So it's deciding, okay, well, my direction is Z, so it's coming from the top. And then depending on the number that I set here, 43, if I go, let's just say like 0, you get like a really intense blend because it's changing the snow so that it blends on every angle. It's not just blending at like negative 43. It's basically just choosing the angles that you want the snow to blend on. So the higher the number, the higher the angle that it will blend on. So I found like negative 43 was actually like a pretty good number. And it takes into account like all the normal maps and everything too. So it blends like on top and combines that with the angle of the slope of the landscape. So you have that, which controls the angle, but you also have the sharpness. So that's basically like the contrast of the blend. So I usually set it really high because I like a lot of contrast. I want to have like really readable shapes. But like, let's say I lower this to 10. So that means that I have to fiddle with my blend bias number. So let's just say 0, -10, -1, 1, 2, 10, -3, -4, but the sharpness basically controls how sharp it is when it actually blends here, like how much contrast you want. I like that number really high, so I'm just going to put it back to 100, -43 for my blend bias. And your height controls how high you want the blend to be. So let's say I lower this number to like -70,000. Then it fills the entire world. So I found it's usually good, depending on how you're using it, to have it like quite high, and depending on what type of blend that you're using. If you're using a flow map, if you're using the noise mask, it's good to have that start kind of in the middle at like where your mountains are quite sloped. So let's just put that back to -40,000. You want to have a nice transition between the snow and the rest of the world. And you have this blur amount right here. And what that does is it takes that line. So remember how I told you if I didn't have the noise texture in here, it would basically just be a line. So if I lower this, say to 0, and then put my height somewhere where you can actually see it, say like 0, you get this line. And I don't like that. Like, I want there to be like a transition between the blend. So the higher the number, basically the more it's going to blur that line and widen it so that your transition is long. And, you can create these nice sweeps between the two, like the bottom and the top sections of your map. So usually a pretty high number works well for this. So I'm going to do like 40,000. Because I changed it to 40,000, made my blend really wide, but my height is actually quite high at 0 right now. So I'm going to switch it back to -40,000. Yeah, see? So like if I do like 10,000, you got to just fiddle with the numbers. Like it's finding the sweet spot between like the height, the blur value, the blend bias, the sharpness, and what type of mask you're using and the contrast in it. But like all the default values should be set up pretty good. I'm just going to revert that 50,000. So that's pretty good. And you have this explicit normal grow amount. So what that does is the way that I'm actually doing the blend is it's combining two things. It's using the vertex normal of your landscape and creating these really thick patches, but then it's actually adding to the mask of the blend the normal blend information. So see all these like little white dots up here? Like that's the snow actually taking the normal of the grass and the rock and everything else, and then blending the snow into it. So, up close, it starts to get really pixely. It breaks down up close, but I don't know, it's pretty fine. Like your camera's probably going to be like out here, but yeah, your explicit normal grow amount is basically how much you want that extra normal layer, like where it's using your normal texture, to grow. So let's say I switch this to like 50, you get like a lot more intense of a blend where it's using the normal map. And if I switch it to 0, it tightens it up a little bit. So like you get a lot less of the normal climbing the landscape, the normal texture of the snow climbing the landscape. But I found like 3 was kind of a nice subtle balance between the vertex normal and the explicit normal. And we have this expensive elevation layer blend feature, which it's mainly just for optimization. And what that will do is it basically makes it so that instead of having both the vertex normal and the explicit normal functions blended together to create your blend, you can turn that off, and it basically makes it so that your normal, like your explicit normal growing amount, will basically be turned off. So it's only going to be using it's only going to be using vertex normal. So if I turn that off, allow it to do some thinking. As soon as I turn that off, you can see the snow isn't really blending into the rock. It's not taking the normal map of all of the other layers into account when it does the blend. It's basically just using the actual forms and shape of the landscape to blend, but it makes the material function of the elevation blend actually a lot cheaper. So it just depends on what you want. Like if you want to have more fine-tooth control and you want it to look nicer, then you can. But if you need a quick win for optimization, you can just disable that. So in here, you have this height lerp contrast. So what that's doing is when we take our noise texture right here and, blend it between the top layer and the bottom layer, it basically just adds contrast to that. So like, let's say I put it to 1. It's going to more closely resemble what the actual noise map is doing. But what I can do is I can add contrast to that and basically make it so my darks are darker and my whites are whiter. And it creates these like kind of sharp lines across it. Basically, the higher I go, the more contrast I'll have in my blend. And, you can see like at the edges of the blend, it's kind of faded. Like, I don't really like that. I don't think snow usually does that much. Like, you don't get these like kind of muddy values between. It's usually either snow or not. Even if it's like lightly powdered snow, it's like the snow still covers the surface. I usually like to have a pretty high value on that one. Let's say I do like 100 and you get like these like really kind of sharp shapes, which I don't know, I think that's actually pretty good, but maybe it's a bit too much. I think I had it to 20 before. Should be okay, maybe like 30, 40. Get like a really nice kind of blend. You could invert the mask too. I put that as a little option in here. It just switches the whites to black and the blacks to whites. I'm sure somebody's going to come up with something where they need that, so I just put it in there anyways. And I have this use flow map for height lerp function. And this is mainly for world machine users. So your flow map is basically this map that gets spouted out of world machine, which shows, it basically mimics water hitting a surface for like thousands of years. And, it just gives you this like more realistic feel across your mountain, like all those little bits coming down the mountains. And, it's kind of world machines like one of their staple features. So yeah, for those of you that would like to take advantage of that feature, you just have to check this box right here, like use flow map, and then enable it here with the second checkbox. Now that I have it enabled, you can see it's using that height lerp that I described earlier, and it's basically like controlling how far down the mountain you have the flows sweeping down it. So if, let's say you wanted to widen this, like we talked about earlier, or make it less wide, 100,000. So that makes it really blurry, right? But that would mean that we would have to lower our number here, so like 60,000. You can have like a really wide blend where it only blends down in the crevasses kind of thing. something like this, if you wanted to make it more apparent, you could change the blend by like the angle that it's being blended on, 39. So it's pretty powerful. Like you can do what you want with it and get the result that you want to. And you'll see when I enabled the flow map for height map, it actually gets rid of all that other mask information, and it just uses the flow map. And one more thing for the elevation layer, if I scroll down a little bit in my master material, into flow map color overlays, there's a new thing for altering the color of your elevation layer here. So if you wanted to enable being able to tweak the color overlay that happens on your flow map, just like in the other shader, you just go here, enable elevation layer, turn that on. And then as soon as you turn that on, you're probably not going to see much. So you're going to have to actually go in here and change your flow map elevation color. Here, I'm just going to copy this so I don't lose it. But copy. And let's say I wanted like really kind of blue streaks where the flow map goes down. I could. Just depends on how you're using it and what you want. I kind of want it to be really, really subtle though on my snow. Like you don't usually get this that much on snow, so I thought like maybe a really kind of subtle gray might help. So if I go to base color, you can actually see it in here changing the actual albedo of the snow. I added this use specular Fresnel, and what that does is it helps to give a kind of more accurate interpretation of how light actually hits the surface and how reflections and specular and all that happen on the angles of your mountains. So if I go to my buffer channel and go to specular, so specular basically controls like how intense you want your reflections to be. By default, it's set to 0.5, which is gray right here. But I put this little Fresnel on it, which depending on the angle that you view things, it actually clamps the specular. So like at those really kind of harsh angles, it gets rid of the reflections in them, and it just overall kind of makes it a little bit better. It's super, super subtle. And if you're looking to save a few shader instructions, you can just turn that off and you'll seriously like barely notice a difference. But I think like for those that really, really want like a realistic landscape, I would definitely turn that on. And one more thing is I included this use unique distance fade values for each material. See how if I'm looking at the rock right now, if I zoom in, it actually switches, it fades to smaller UVs so that it tiles less in the distance. Before, the way I had it was in each layer that's enabled. Down here, you'd have a distance at which it would fade. So say like this one is like 6,000. But I found it's just too many options in each shader. So I actually just made a check mark here. So you can say use unique distance fade values for each material. And if I uncheck that, it means that I have one value for the entire world. So let's say I set this to like 14,000. You don't see it happening. Say like 0. So if it's at 0, it's basically just seeing the background everywhere. But that's happening on the snow, it's happening on the dirt, it's happening on the grass and everything else, right? So I found like 6,000 is actually like a pretty reasonable number. Like you still get like a nice untiled vista, but when you're actually like walking through it, it actually looks nice. So thank you all so much for watching, and if you guys like the video, be sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell on YouTube. Cheers.